Hello, my friends. Now, as you know, at the time of this video, there's a lot of problems in the U.S. I mean, there's problems all around the world, but here in the U.S., there's a lot of problems. There's social problems, political problems, health problems. It's just almost like everything is a problem. And so I got thinking about some things, and I was like, instead of just trying to hyper focus on certain topics, and it may not really be something that most people want to hear, probably me rant on about certain things that are somewhat, obvious, but at the same time, there might be nuances that people aren't so much aware of. But nonetheless, I think it would be better to take approach of just talking about big picture issues of how like certain things that would probably do a lot of good if we did these things here in the U.S. So I have 10 things that would provide positive change here in America. And now I go on a limb on some of these, even though I totally believe in them. So you're just going to have to kind of just really hear me out and not just make a quick judgment of like, what is he talking about? I can't believe he said that. I think that, deep down, we kind of know that all these 10 things I'm about to say are very true. And there really should not be any problems with these being adopted. But what we really do see in reality is that there's a lot of resistance to most of these because there's a lot of underlying problems that sustain these. And that's what is causing the toxic nature of society right now. So the first thing I want to say that would help America would be to stop teaching the theory of macroevolution. And there's a lot of reasons for this. I mean, I could just do a whole series of videos just on this. And this is why it's so hard to kind of just talk about it for a few seconds and move on because it doesn't do it justice. But what macroevolution does is it tells us that we have no purpose. We just randomly came about by chance. And, when you teach someone that, they have no real value and that, they don't really mean anything, then they're going to act like that too. And so macroevolution teaches that humans evolved from minerals and rocks, which there's really no evidence from that to state that at all. This theory, and it's a loose theory at that, states that non-organic material became organic over time. We see no evidence of that. And it's totally not scientific, to say these things, but yet this is what's being taught. They also says that non-conscious states became conscious. I mean, how does that happen, really? So what we see here, this is not real science. This is like pseudoscience at best. This is just loose theories. These things have never been observed in the history of the world by any people in recorded history. This is a cult religion, if you ask me, and this is just to bolster atheism. Atheism has really kind of gotten into the scientific world, and you don't see a lot of real science being done like it used to be. Now, I want to say a lot more about this, but I'm going to have to move on. So let's go to number 2. This one is to develop self-discipline and core moral standings. And of course, this needs to be done on an individual and family level first before you can transform a society and a nation. So why is it so important to have self-discipline? It's because you'll get to understand what things have value. It's a big problem right now in the U.S. It seems like, especially the younger people, not all younger people, but definitely some that I've met in recent times, they just don't seem like there's anything out there that they hold a value. They don't respect people or things that people have done. And so this is a problem because down the road, you start coming into topics like life, right, and liberty. And if people have no values for things, then they don't value life and liberty, right? And so when you take a life, to some people, it's just kind of like whatever, because going back to number 1, life doesn't really mean anything. We have no purpose. We were all just randomly evolved from rocks and minerals, right? So taking a life is wrong, though, if you have any type of moral upstanding, if you have discipline, if you have respect for yourself and others. So you know that life is very special, and taking a life is really very deviant and immoral. And it destroys a society when we have various institutions in place and laws that allow abortion, euthanasia. We have politics that push us into wars. We have an imbalance of influence in society from the press and or from various elites or shadow governments, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. And we have a lot of civil, conflicts based on a lot of disinformation and ignorance of our own history. And this leads us to number 3, is to learn from history, not destroy it. And this is what we're seeing now, a lot of monuments being destroyed. And this connotation that, every Confederate soldier or person in history was a racist. This is not true whatsoever. And how would they know? They just default on all this. And there is no conversation about that the North had slaves or indentured servants. There's no conversation going on about, free black men owning slaves. You don't hear about any of that because that's not part of the disinformation. And so it's really disturbing that people want to erase history because they don't want to understand it. They're so blind by ignorance. And I think it's only going to get worse. It's almost like, at what point can we have peace? And for some people, there is no point of peace because their objective is not peace. It's just conflict and anarchy. And they want to destroy certain institutions that are doing just fine to replace them with ones that are much less efficient. And those are the socialists. So history does repeat itself unless we understand it. And right now, people are not willing to understand our history. And so we are doomed to repeat it. And that's what's going on right now. And what's so very, very sad about this is that you have groups like Black Lives Matter, obviously groups that really don't care about black people. Black Lives Matter doesn't really care about black people. And it's very obvious. I mean, there's so many indicators. I'll just pick one out of the sky, one out of the ether, right? And that would be abortion. I mean, good Lord. So many black babies are killed through abortion every year. And it is not something that's even touched on by Black Lives Matter. Nope, that's not important. So apparently for them, it's you can kill as many black babies as you want, but if you actually hurt or kill, any developed black humans, that's wrong, right? And of course, their whole ideology, their whole utopian, really, distorted way of thinking about how the world should be is also very disturbing. And let me tell you just on a personal note, I've been taking note every time I see a company support and pledge money to Black Lives Matter, I boycott them. And that includes Amazon.com here in America. Just be aware of that. It's $10 million to various groups. And one of those groups was Black Lives Matter. So I boycott Amazon and any other company that's going to be putting up money for these very distorted people, these very unbalanced people that have selective thinking and that only want to promote certain political ideologies. And they don't really have core values of life and liberty. Let's go ahead to number 4. And that is, everyone needs a skill or trade, right? Everyone needs an education. They need to do something. They need to give. That's what humans are, very social creatures. And we excel when we can help others. And most personality types actually excel very, very much so when you can have the ability to help someone else. And this is the key to a prosperous nation, right? When everybody can contribute on some level. So everyone needs to have, even growing up, exposure to certain skills and trades. And what's the problem right now about this is that you have a lot of family members that don't know how to do pretty much anything. They're very dependent on the government. And because they're so dependent, there's no incentive to learn anything and to better themselves. And so you have so many generations are being brought up. They don't know how to do anything. They don't know how to contribute to society. They don't know how to even help themselves or to raise their own family without self-destructing. And then you wonder why certain groups of the population have higher crime. They have more social problems. And so I mean, the government also is part of the problem here, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But right now, individuals need to stand up and take responsibility for the history that their families have led. And they need to change the history if it's not for the best. Number 5, market manipulations. These need to stop. So you have the government and central banks infusing billions and sometimes even trillions of dollars they could be stimulus money. It could be just various buybacks. It could just be trying to keep liquidity in the market so that the market doesn't collapse and default. But, when you're talking billions and trillions of dollars, then you have what you would call a propped up market. And, you can't selectively, in a real just and fair society, you can't seriously pick and choose who wins. But in this world that we live in right now, and in this country of the U.S., that's what's going on. We have corporations, we have various conglomerations that are picked. We have certain markets that are preferred over others to remain intact, to remain intact, because there's a lot of influence from the outside for various reasons to keep certain types of companies and markets afloat. And I mean, even at the time of this video, the markets are way, way inflated. They're in big bubbles. I mean, here we have the real economy. We have Main Street that is crashing and burning, record unemployment. We have all this crazy unemployment numbers that we've never even seen before. Businesses going out of business at a record pace. And consumer buying is very low right now, but the market, it's like at this almost new high. And there's a major disconnect between Main Street and Wall Street. So we have this propping up of certain markets and corporations, and this needs to end. Because a free market, what a real free market does is it self-regulates. And I've learned this over the years reading numerous books on economics. For some reason, it's a very interesting topic, and that's just because it kind of talks about our way of life, at least how it should be. And free markets self-regulate over time, but it should be like this. Those who make the better product or who produce a better service, they should survive, not just anyone. And what we're seeing, though, is we're seeing a lot of companies that should have gone under being saved. It's a real sad thing. And I'm not against, some companies getting help if they are, a good company that have lots of, future potential that really do benefit society. And maybe in some limited way, government can interact and maybe give them a loan or something. But to provide all businesses, those who are failing to begin with, major cash infusions and loans doesn't make sense. Let's go to number 6. I have a lot more to say about number 5, but yeah, I have to cut these off, and I apologize. There's a lot to go into about these things, but I think it's just good at least to highlight some of these. It's better than not talking about it at all. So number 6 is that Americans could benefit from a holistic perspective to health. And of course, even in a lot of other ways too, but let's just focus on health here. Chiropractic health, I think, is really amazing. The body alignment, that really is a field that doesn't get a lot of attention. Various fields that deal with nutrition, stress management, avoidance and education of toxic material that's out there, toxic lifestyles, toxic foods, toxic whatever. These things are really important. I mean, we don't see a holistic approach. When you go to your doctor, I mean, you almost rarely ever get asked, how many hours of sleep you get at night, or what foods do you eat? Are you happy at all with your job, or are you in a good relationship, or is it toxic? Or, you just don't ever almost get asked any of these questions. Do you go for a walk every once in a while? Are you active? Or do you just sit in front of a TV and watch the 24-hour news stream? I mean, there's some reasons that certain things happen, and it's pretty amazing how doctors are just like, oh, you have these symptoms. We're going to give you these chemical pharmaceutical, tablets. And as we know that most doctors these days, they treat symptoms, not the underlying cause. And if they were actually like get into the cause, the real deep cause, I'm sure a lot of places would go out of business. So there's a reason, but I think that's really, a sinister thing. I think it's really sad that there are businesses built just to maintain your dependency on them because they don't want to really treat the underlying cause, but just symptoms. Now let's move on to number 7. And I believe that more research should be done on the harmful effects of living in high density urban areas. And basically, answer the question of how can it be improved? How can people's health and well-being be improved? Because we see lots of indicators. We see markers across the board that there's problems. People are much more stressed out. There's a lot more crime. In fact, in some cases, and I've done a video recently on this, there's over 12 times more crime than in some of the rural areas in America. But there's a lot of problems, lots of problems in urban areas. And I do believe that for most people, they just don't do well being like real close to other people. People need privacy and space and quiet. Light pollution, noise pollution are big deals. And I think it even goes so far as like deeper spiritual things too, like just to be able to look up at night at the sky and see the stars and the Milky Way and all. You can't really do that at all in most cities. There's so much light pollution. You can't feel like you're in a natural environment when you're surrounded by a concrete jungle, with skyscrapers and buildings and everything is pretty much just rock and concrete and stuff. And, if you don't, I think there's also like a lot of interesting things that need to be said about like colors and things. When you don't get enough green, like vegetation, if you're not around enough vegetation and green, I think it messes with you. I really do. And, there's a lot to be said about this. A lot to be said. And I'd even be curious about the oxygen levels in urban areas. I mean, it's got to be a lot lower, I would imagine, than like if you're outside the city because there's a lot less plants in the city. You kind of wonder about all this. But it's just something that I see it getting worse before it gets better because people still in their minds think it's just better to move to a city and not to have space and privacy and more freedoms. But we're going to get to a peaking, like a point of a peak, at some point in history. It may be 100 years from now or more, but I think that people will start to wise up that, this whole idea that there's a magical solution and that's like living in a city is not going to really, gel well for a lot of people in the future when you have close to the entire population living in a very small area in these cities. I think it's going to get to a point that there will be a whole pushback on this and there will be a movement. And I predict this down the road at some point, there will be a movement of leaving the cities, even if it's not going to be that far from the cities. I think, and I can see that suburban America life could expand greatly when people really see, especially if there's more research done, like the benefits of living outside the city. And just once again, I don't regret moving from a city into a more open area, more rural area. It's just a lot more peace and quiet. Let's jump to number 8 now, and that is community leadership. And leadership, in our communities, in our cities, towns, or wherever we live, I believe should promote family preparedness. And this should not come to a surprise. No surprise here. I mean, this is a preparedness channel. But we need to look at, talking about real core issues. Do you have an emergency fund? Do you have emergency supplies? Do you have some basic survival skills? Do you know what to do if there's a storm and damages your house or whatever is the threat in your area? Do you really have knowledge of how to deal with it? Not just like, I think I do, but do you really know? And I think that there should be a lot more preparedness groups, local preparedness groups, and that should be very much promoted by community leaders. Number 9, news should be reported objectively. not with a political slant or bias. Man, I tell you what, the mainstream media has really been guilty for a number of years now of contributing to disinformation, propaganda, to informing a public very poorly. And the public really is ill-informed. Let's just put it out there. The power of the media to persuade people is amazingly high, and it should be regulated to some degree. And I'm not sure how exactly you would do this. You definitely want to keep the First Amendment intact. But at some point, though, you can't have, very obvious, blatant, disinformation to go out as the truth. And so I think a lot of this has to do with just people waking up and not supporting certain groups. And over time, they would just go away if no one supported them. So I think a lot of this has to go in the hands of us. But there may have to be some regulation in some way. And I wouldn't want it to be too tight, though, at all. I would have to be loose regulations in terms of just if you're going to be saying that this is news, then you're going to have to just report things objectively. Once again, it's a very slippery slope. I'm not sure how you would go about that. But if you don't have regulations on some level, if you don't have standards within how the news is reported, and if news isn't reported objectively, then it threatens the peace of the people. This is what I see over and over. The people don't trust the media at all anymore. And I know I don't. You can barely even find yourself even wanting to even want to watch anything anymore because you're like, dude, I don't know if it's taken out of context. You're showing a video clip, for example, but it might be the very end of a conflict and you're not showing the whole first 5 minutes. And so things are completely taken out of context. And this is what you see over and over and over for various political, gain. And it's just ridiculous. So definitely the news has to be restructured. There has to be better standards. If not, it's just going to be another element that continues to contribute to chaos that leads to more anarchy. Number 10, we need a smaller government. This goes without saying. The U.S. has governments that are just so bloated. And so let's just start at the top. The federal government needs to be cut into little pieces, right? We don't want to get rid of the federal government. It does have a role to serve the people, but it doesn't need to be this big. It may just need to be maybe a tenth the size it is, and the budget needs to be shrunk down massively, massively. And so when you have a smaller government, you have less taxes, right? And talking about taxes, we definitely need tax reform. The taxes should not be so complicated that even people that are professional tax people, they can't even figure out the taxes sometimes. So we need a simpler means of collecting taxes and doing your taxes. Just a lot of people have a hard time even knowing what their tax liability is. When you have a smaller government, you also have less waste. Waste is such a big issue. I can't even imagine what we actually waste just because we have such a large government. A smaller government also has less politics and less interference with the civilian life and free markets. And that's a good thing. So we definitely want smaller governments because it reduces the threat to freedom. And because governments are smaller, they have less influence and it maintains the ability to have more freedoms. And you just don't have all these ridiculous laws and rules all over the place that a lot of people don't even know. The average civilian probably doesn't even have knowledge of not even half of the rules and laws in this country because there's so many thousands and thousands of them. Now, a lot of these rules and laws are selectively enforced and in some cases just not enforced at all. But it's so crazy that we have so many laws that the average person could even get close to even knowing them all, or we just have no idea. And I think it's really disturbing because if you don't know what the laws are, then how do you know how to obey the law and be a good citizen? So I'm all about freedom. So I think you get maximum freedom when you have less interference with government. And you know what? When you have smaller government, you also have less influence from the various parties that run every so many years for election. And this whole two-party system that we have now, man, It's just ridiculous. And I believe very strongly there should not be a determining factor just based on, how much money you have or who you know. It's very disturbing. It's very disturbing to see that it's like, only the wealthy get elected to high office, and only if you have like certain people that you kind of get into certain doors. It's very disturbing. So, I mean, the political system in the U.S. is completely not open to the average person. Like someone like myself would never even get in the door. I couldn't even get my big toe in the door because I don't know anybody in the system. I'm not wealthy. I don't, have all this clout politically. And so that's a big problem. So anyways, I just wanted to go over these 10 things that would provide a positive change in America if they were implemented. I'd be happy if just one or two of these started to move toward a better position. But I don't see a lot of these actually going anywhere until the American people wake up and see where we are and how far down the road we are toward either a civil war or, full on anarchy. I mean, at the direction that we're going, it's almost like American way of life is being threatened pretty heavily by very small groups of people that are pulling on the heartstrings of Americans, because the average American's they're good people. And the media is really violating the trust of the American people right now. And there's a lot of politicians as well doing a lot of violating. And no wonder people don't trust other people, because they've been lied to so many times. So that needs to change. I hope this helped on some way to just kind of think about this. I really do appreciate your input, all your comments, hitting the like button and subscribing, and for sharing my videos to other people. I've noticed that we've got a nice surge of new subscribers. I really do appreciate those people who help the channel. I try to get back to people who leave messages, but just note that I have thousands of videos, and sometimes even just getting one or two message on each, getting just a couple messages on each video can pile up every day. And so there can be a very large number of messages, but I tried my best to get back with you. And once again, I do appreciate, you checking in and saying hello. And if that's all you want to do, that's fine too. Just let me know that everything's going well. There's people on the channel that's been here for years and years. And I definitely don't take you guys for granted at all. I really do appreciate you guys a lot. And so you guys stay safe, take care, catch you later.